with Ken and the folks in Harvey County, and Diane, spelling my name is no big deal. At Washington Days, I made my largest apology in my life, which was in front of an audience of about 500 people, and that was to Governor John Carlin. And the apology goes back about 30 years ago when I was president of the Kansas Young Democrats, and I was thrilled. I had this really attractive young lady on my arms, and I take her to this fundraiser for Governor John Carlin, and I introduced her to him as George Carlin. And I'm not sure I had a chance 30 years ago to make that apology, but in front of 500 people, I've never made that large apology in my life, and so I did. And Diane, if you were to Google my name in any way at all, you would find this SCHSHUCKSHUKMAN. So it's all over the place, and I'm happy. Just anybody say Perry.
You know what's embarrassing? I have your sign at my house.
Well, we won't get it wrong today either, will we? So. And I want to say thank you to Therese. She's been a very, very good friend over the last couple of years, and really kind of after some changes in my life with family and a girlfriend who passed away, it gave me some real time to get involved in the democratic process again back in Kansas, and Therese was really a good friend in helping me do that. And lastly, you know, they say you always got to introduce family, right? And although I consider him my best friend, he keeps telling everybody else that Perry's like family. So I'd like to introduce my good buddy Desmond Blake, and what does make us family? I am Desmond's daughter's godfather, and so that does make us family, I guess. And it's a real pleasure to have Desmond running our video camera here, as long as I don't step too far either direction at all. You know, this campaign is really a discussion about social justice, social and economic justice. You know, and it comes down to who we hang out with, who we know, and how we relate to each other. Congressman Mike Pompeo hobnobs, obviously, with Charles Koch. He's very friendly with Charles Koch, and so we're a product of our environment, who we know, and how we participate in our community. So when Charles Koch and Mike Pompeo decided to vote against the Farm Bill and raise the price of a gallon of milk from $4 a gallon to $8 a gallon or $9 a gallon of milk, they had no understanding of what social and economic justice was about when they voted against the Farm Bill. You know, it's amazing to think about people from San Francisco and the city of New York City having to vote for the Farm Bill for the state of Kansas when not one of our congressional candidates actually voted for it. It makes no sense at all. And Charles Koch doesn't understand what a middle-class family has to go through just to survive with the crumbs that are being thrown out to him right now. And the idea of doubling the price of a gallon of milk is absurd, and they have no understanding of that. They do not understand. And I also am a product of my environment. You know, I mentioned a moment ago I had a chance to introduce John Carlin to a friend of mine, but I also at that same time period was running for the Kansas State Board of Education. Now, at 19 years of age, that was a pretty cool thing to do. It was a real mistake if I would have been elected, I think. But surprisingly, I won 46% of the vote in 6 of the 10 counties. The greatest memory I have of that, and Kermit will agree, is I got to ride in Miss Kansas pageant. At 19, that's a pretty cool thing. But I also was quoted throughout the newspapers as saying I was opposed to the free breakfast program. And you know why I was opposed to the free breakfast program? Because my single mother, who raised 3 children, made sure we had pancakes or bacon or eggs and powdered milk mixed into a milk container so she could fool us every single morning. So I thought, well, if my mother could do this, every child has that same opportunity. And I was convinced of that when I was going out campaigning at the age of 19. But it took expanding my vision and understanding circumstances and what life was like outside of my little confines of my comfortable home in Hutchinson, Kansas. And so when I got the chance to go to San Jose State University, which I got to do right after I left Hutchinson Community College, and I was excited to do that. But I was also introduced to the nonprofit world. And in doing that, I had a chance to learn a lot more about how people were living. And And so I'd like to share just a couple of anecdotal stories with you, if I could. First thing I did, the very first thing I did in the nonprofit world as a paid position was to open a homeless shelter. The very first homeless shelter in San Mateo County for adult homeless. And you know, we think that's an easy job, and I was amazed. Simple story here. I was amazed. I had a crowd of 120 people standing in line. I had volunteers with food inside with ladles ready to go. And you know what we couldn't do because we couldn't open the door? Because we couldn't figure out how to put the military specification cots that were given away to us together. It looked like we were all jumbled up with these cots trying to figure out how to put it, and nobody sent us directions on it. So it took us a little time to learn, but I'd like to share with you just one story from Christmas Eve in that homeless shelter. And I was maybe 32 years of age at this stage. And I was sitting, going around, we did, you know, socks and tidy-whities and things like this for our clients in the shelter. But I sat at one cot with what I believe has to be the probably largest drunken individual I've ever met in my entire life. And well, I don't mean that funny. He was really badly inebriated all the time. And his name was Randy. And I sat at the cot with Randy. And he was talking to me. He was a Vietnam era veteran. I know that because later I worked with veterans, and I'll mention that in a moment. But he was talking to me about how at least how he attributed his addiction to alcohol was because of the Vietnam War. And having to go out and fight in the Vietnam War, and according to the story he told me, and I sincerely believe it because it was occurring on Christmas Eve and how he told it, but he was ordered to kill a young girl who was approaching his platoon. And he has had impact ever since then. We're talking 1985. And so he had already been out of Vietnam for probably 20 years, 15, 20 years, and had detrimental impact upon him. You know, this is not social justice. When we send a young man to go to war like this, we expect that they're actually going to be able to come out and have a chance to justify their actions and to survive in the community. I want to tell you a couple other stories real quick throughout my nonprofit career, which kind of helps to build my environmental understanding of social justice and social and economic justice. I had a young woman, her name was Dulce, but she allowed me to call her Sweet because I always said it wrong. And she was in an education program that I managed. I didn't really actually work in that tutorial and education program, but she was a student in it, and somehow I felt I was confident with fractions and multiplication and division. So I was allowed to tutor her. And she was kind of a stubborn sixth grader with a real attitude and real difficulties. But I started giving her some encouragement. And as I gave her more encouragement, she actually started catching on to the math and started doing more and more work. And I sent her more and more work home, and then we started getting her extra credit in her classrooms. And that was great. But she was still pretty stubborn, so whenever I tried to recognize her in class, in the tutorial program, she didn't really want to accept that recognition. She just, you know, stubborn. But I gave her a note, a handwritten note one day. And I saw her, I thought, well, it's nice, a little envelope, and I saw her stick that envelope into her school book. So none of the students saw her take that out or receive that. A couple minutes into the tutorial program, I saw her slip that note out of the book. And she looked at it, and it was just a congratulatory note. And all of a sudden she had tears streaming down her eyes. And you know, it just tells, this is my only story about education. I've never had a chance to teach in any other circumstance at all. But I can tell you right now that teachers have an incredibly important value in our community. And I learned that firsthand by just having a chance to meet with Sweet Dulce and working with her like that. One other anecdotal story. You know, in addition to everything, I've opened 5 homeless shelters. I can talk to you about medical clinics. I've opened 2 charity medical clinics, one that received the Peace Award from the Dalai Lama for our work. We had 80 volunteer doctors, and it was exciting to do that. So when I hear Mike Pompeo talk about Obamacare, well, I'd like to get him to start changing that. I'd like him to start talking about Pericare, because he doesn't even want to go there. I am going to be a lot more inclusive to making sure that people have access to health care all the way around. But one young lady came into our program, and she was 17 years of age, her family came in, and we provided some rental assistance and helping them with a variety of things. And I can't give you all the stories, all the experiences I've had, but this particular family just didn't have the money to pay for a high school graduation gown. It cost us nothing. You know, we were very fortunate to have funds, and we were able to go out and spend 80 or 90, I have no idea, I just approved it, and go out and buy a gown for this young lady. And I don't think I understood the value of that until I took my mother, who had Alzheimer's, out, and we went to Applebee's in Hutchinson. And all of a sudden these kids were pulling up in limousines. What's up with that? Going to Applebee's for their high school reunion. And I mentioned my mom what was going on, and I think she knew who she was with at the time, being me, but she started reflecting back on her high school prom, like it was just yesterday. And she could tell me the decorations. I don't know who she went to the prom with, I can't remember the name. I know it wasn't my dad, but whoever it was put sparkles in her eyes. And I realized then how important it was that our community that I participated in sent this young lady to her high school prom in a gown as well. And I don't think that unless you actually get a chance to touch the environment, to touch the community that we work in, we really, really understand the necessity and the needs that people have all the way around. Now, I want to make sure that Charles Koch has a square deal. I don't want to take any opportunities away from Charles Koch. And he was born with great opportunities, and I congratulate him on his success. But I want to make sure that Sweet has that same opportunity for success all the way through her life. I want to make sure that young girl, when she is talking to her son 40 years later, is talking about her graduation and her high school reunion, and she has stars in her eyes and sparkles in her eyes. And so I think we have to address all of these things, and we need to make sure that people understand, Kansans understand, particularly the 4th District, that we have to vote for our own self-interests. You know, when we see the Americans for Prosperity commercials, and my daughters will tell you, I never use the word lie. I even correct them on the word lie. Don't say lie. Maybe somebody misunderstood, maybe somebody was mistaken, but don't say lie unless it was intentional. Americans for Prosperity's commercials are lies. They're fabricated with lies, lies. I'm going to catch up with my speech now because somewhere I just kind of went on my own, and I hope it worked okay. You know, there are between social and economic justice, and we're not going to talk foreign policy. I get to address foreign policy and national security in the next couple of Rotary Club meetings I'll be going to in the next couple of weeks. But today I'd like to talk about social and economic justice. And you know, the first place, and you tell me if you agree with this. If you agree with this, I'd just like to hear you roar out justice. But if we need to end the militarization of our police departments and advance community building to build communities, it is time for what? Justice. Justice. If it's time to cease fighting for the few economic crumbs left behind by the Wall Street elite, do you know that the top 1% of our population has more division between the other 99% than has occurred since 1928, and we know what happened in 1929. If you think it's time to stop fighting for the crumbs that are left behind and start making sure the middle-class Kansans have a true opportunity and vote for their self-interest, it is time for what? Justice. If you think it's time to start supporting Kansas farmers with Kansas legislators, and I grew up on a farm, I understand the weight of a bale of hay versus a bale of straw. And if I'm going to throw something on a truck, I'd much rather be a bale of straw. I've milked cows. You know, it was so much nicer when we actually had electric milking machines. But when that power went out, your arms got really tired. And so I understand farming. I don't know Congressman Pompeo does when they vote against it. But it is time to change how legislators vote from Kansas for farming. And if we do that, it is time for what? Justice. We need to protect our students' educational needs and get our federal legislators out of the way. It is time for what?
Justice.
We need to promote a health care plan that assures the well-being of all Kansans. It is time for what? Justice. We're going to make it a little bit louder because, you know, I'm taping this, and somewhere, I've never posted anything on Facebook, but I've got two brilliant daughters who do all Facebook and YouTube and all this stuff. So they're going to hear in Colorado and San Francisco, where they both reside, you all say justice. So I'm going to need a little help in this as well as we go along. And we need to promote ecology. You know, I've mentioned before in several presentations, I applaud Governor Brownback for one thing. One thing. He formed a state committee to study to see whether fracking was safe or not. And he gave him a 2-year order to come back with a report. 2-year order. Now it seems to me, given that this oil and gas has been under our land, under our feet, for billions of years, it's not going to go anywhere in the next 2 years. So why would we do the study to see if it's safe? Why don't we stop fracking until we find out if it's safe?
Yeah.
Right? It makes no sense. It makes no sense to attack the EPA when we know that we've had federal cleanups throughout the nation. We know why that's occurring, because sometimes people make mistakes. The education may not be appropriate, and sometimes Wall Street greed gets in the way. And so we need to fight to protect our ecology, which means we need to fight for justice. There we go. Now they're hearing it in San Francisco. And we need to get the government out of our bedrooms and our love lives. There is no reason for the government or our employers to know what our love lives or what our experiences after work are. We need to fight for justice. And so this is the last one, so we need to get really loud on this one. And we need to make sure that Kansans have a chance for a livable wage. You know, I've gone around and talked about changes in the minimum wage, and that's great. I got to tell you that in 1992, when I was running the organization for 100 staff, my minimum wage for my gardener, and that was the lowest paid position in our organization, was $12 an hour. It makes no sense, and it's impossible to understand how anybody at $7.25, 22 years later, are still trying to survive out there at all. And people say, well, you know, if we change that minimum wage, isn't it going to create inflation, or it's going to create all these other problems? I want to tell them, don't you understand that the CEO of Merrill Lynch in January got a 75% pay raise? Did that create inflation? Did it create the increase in anything at all that hurts any of us? Not at all. All it's done is squeeze the American public for more and more money. Out of our benefits are our wages. So we need to fight for changes and make a livable wage. And we need to fight for justice. There we go. That's good, all right, Aletha, I appreciate that. So, you know, I've had a chance. I've visited many of the counties. I've been to Pratt and Edwards and Cali, and I've really appreciated all of these efforts and Harvey County. And of course, I live in Sedgwick. But it's really important that we get this coordinated campaign off. You know, we've got lots and lots of yard signs. We've got lots of yard signs out already, and we're going to put hundreds and hundreds more yard signs out. And we're going to make sure that people start seeing this next to my Pompeo. Now, I probably don't have the money yet. Don't know if I will. The money yet to have the yard signs that are as big as this table. But you know, there might be a chance that we can get those. And one of the ways that we might get those is if you get lucky and you pull up your brochure. You might find in the middle of that brochure this little envelope. Now you may think this envelope and this little giving card looks cheap, but let me tell you what. If you run homeless shelters, 5 of them, if you fed 800 people a day, if you provided charity health clinic for 800 people a day, you learn how to be thrifty, and I am one thrifty character. So all you have to do is fill this out. And maybe on November 4th, we'll all find ourselves a winner. I want to thank you all for coming out today, and I look forward to a change in Kansas for social and economic justice for all.